security gate slammed shut behind Captain Vera Ghost Nakamura with the finality of a coffin lid. No explanation, no court-martial, just a manila envelope containing her discharge papers and a terse note. Effective immediately. Personal effects to be collected within 48 hours. The guards wouldn't meet her eyes as she walked away from Ramstein Air Base, her flight suit still smelling of jet fuel and her hands still steady from years of threading F-16s through impossible spaces. 3 weeks later, she was stocking shelves at a hardware store in Kaiserslautern, Germany, trying to forget the feel of stick and rudder, when the sound of rotors began cutting through the morning air. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump grew closer, deeper than the usual medical helicopters that served the nearby hospital. Customers pressed their faces against the windows as a matte black US-60 Blackhawk descended toward the parking lot, its twin General Electric T-700 engines screaming defiance against gravity. The helicopter touched down with military precision, kicking up a cloud of debris that sent shopping carts rolling like tumbleweeds. Through the swirling dust, Vera could make out something that made her blood freeze. There, painted in crisp white letters beneath the cockpit, was her call sign, Ghost 7. The rear door slid open, revealing 3 figures in unmarked tactical gear. The lead operator, a woman with silver threading through her black hair, stepped down and scanned the parking lot with predator eyes. When her gaze found Vera through the store window, she smiled, not the warm smile of recognition, but the cold smile of someone who had been hunting. "Ma'am," the hardware store manager whispered beside her, his voice barely audible above the helicopter's cooling engines. "Do you know these people?" Vera's hand moved instinctively to where her sidearm should have been, muscle memory from 100 combat sorties over Afghanistan and Iraq. But there was nothing there now except the cheap polyester of a retail uniform. She had been grounded, stripped of rank, and erased from the official record for reasons that still made no sense. The investigation into her incident over Syria had lasted exactly 47 minutes, long enough to destroy a 15-year career, but too short for anyone to explain why. The silver-haired woman was walking toward the store now, her boots crunching across broken asphalt with the measured pace of someone accustomed to delivering either salvation or death. Behind her, the other operators maintained overwatch positions, their weapons held in low-ready stance that suggested this was not a social call. Vera had spent 3 years wondering what really happened during that classified mission, the one that had vanished from all official records along with her military career. Now, apparently, the mission had found her. The mission commander who had betrayed her, Colonel Marcus Thorne, thought he had buried both the operation and the only witness who could expose the truth. He had been wrong about the operation, and he had been catastrophically wrong about underestimating Ghost. The first tactical error in warfare is assuming your enemy is defeated simply because you cannot see them. Some ghosts, once awakened, refuse to rest until justice is served. The Blackhawk's engines were already beginning to spool up again, as if the crew knew exactly how long this conversation would take. Through the store's security cameras, figures in suits watched from a command center 7,000 miles away. Someone had just made a very expensive mistake. Someone had forgotten that the best pilots aren't just skilled, they're survivors, and survivors remember everything. The silver-haired woman reached for the door handle, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Whatever came next, Vera realized, had been planned for months. The only question was whether she was being recruited or eliminated. Outside, the Blackhawk's rotors continued their ominous rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat counting down to something that would either restore her honor or end her life. The choice, she suspected, would be entirely hers to make. In the reflection of the store window, Vera caught sight of her own face, older now, marked by 3 years of civilian exile, but with eyes that still held the steady focus of a combat pilot. Whatever they wanted, whoever they were, they had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed that grounding Ghost meant she had forgotten how to fly. The woman pushed through the door, and the sound of the bell seemed to echo with the weight of destiny. "Captain Nakamura," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding elite units. "My name is Director Elena Vasquez. We need to talk." Vera's hand tightened around the price gun she had been holding, an absurd weapon against whatever storm was about to break over her carefully reconstructed life. "I'm not a captain anymore," she replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Haven't been for 3 years." "That," Vasquez said, glancing meaningfully at the Blackhawk outside, "depends entirely on your answer to our next question." The other customers had begun to evacuate, sensing the electricity in the air that preceded either violence or revelation. The store manager retreated to his office, suddenly finding urgent paperwork that required his immediate attention. In the space of 30 seconds, the building had emptied of everyone except the two women who stood facing each other across a display of garden hoses and fertilizer. "You disappeared a classified stealth reconnaissance aircraft over Syrian airspace in 2022, Vasquez continued, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer to whatever question was coming. "Official records indicate pilot error and equipment failure. The aircraft was never recovered." Vera felt the familiar sensation of pulling GS in a high-speed turn, the way reality seemed to compress and expand simultaneously when forces beyond normal human tolerance pressed against the boundaries of consciousness. "That's what the report said." "The report," Vasquez said, pulling a tablet from her tactical vest, "was a lie." The tablet's screen showed satellite imagery that made Vera's breath catch in her throat. There, in crisp digital resolution, was her F-22 Raptor sitting intact in what appeared to be an underground hangar facility. The aircraft's stealth coating gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, and she could even make out her personal aircraft number, AF054187, painted on the landing gear bay. "Impossible," Vera whispered, though even as she said it, pieces of a 3-year-old puzzle began sliding into place. The mission parameters that had never made tactical sense, the radio silence from command during the most critical phase of flight, the way her aircraft systems had begun malfunctioning in perfect sequence, almost as if someone had programmed the failures. "Satellite surveillance indicates the aircraft has been moved at least 4 times since your supposed crash," Vasquez explained, swiping through additional images. "Each time, it appears briefly on runways near Russian or Iranian military installations before disappearing again." The hardware store suddenly felt impossibly small, as if the walls were closing in around a secret that had grown too large for any civilian space to contain. Vera's mind raced through the implications. If her Raptor was still operational, still being moved between enemy facilities, then someone was using America's most advanced stealth technology to conduct operations that could destabilize the entire global balance of power. "Who has it?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Vasquez's smile held no warmth whatsoever. "Someone who thought you were dead." Colonel Marcus Thorne sat in his Pentagon office, reviewing deployment schedules with the satisfied air of a man whose secrets had remained buried for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. His promotion to full bird colonel had come through just months after the Nakamura incident, along with a transfer to a strategic planning position that kept him safely distant from operational commands where inconvenient questions might arise. The secure phone on his desk buzzed once, the tone reserved for priority alpha communications. He lifted the receiver with practiced calm, already composing the authoritative responses that had served him well throughout his career. "Colonel Thorne." "Sir, we have a problem." The voice belonged to Master Sergeant Powell, his intelligence liaison. "Blackhawk operations just pulled an unauthorized extraction in Germany." Thorne's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. "Elaborate." "Target was a civilian contractor, former military. The extraction team used call sign Ghost 7. The mug slipped from Thorne's fingers, shattering against his desk in an explosion of ceramic and steaming coffee. Ghost 7 was supposed to be dead. Ghost 7 was supposed to have died in a fireball over Syria, taking her inconvenient knowledge about Operation Shadowfall with her. The entire carefully constructed narrative of pilot error and equipment failure depended on Ghost 7 remaining permanently silent. "Are you certain?" he managed, his voice sounding strange and distant in his own ears. "Positive identification, sir. Captain Vera Nakamura is alive and in the custody of what appears to be a black operations unit. No paperwork trail, no authorization through normal channels. Someone is operating outside standard command structure." Thorne's mind raced through scenarios, each more catastrophic than the last. If Nakamura was talking, if she was providing testimony to investigators about what really happened during Shadowfall, then everything, his promotion, his reputation, his freedom, would collapse faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. "Timeline," he barked into the phone, already reaching for his personal encrypted cell phone. "Extraction occurred 17 minutes ago. Aircraft departed German airspace heading northeast. Current location unknown." Thorne ended the call and immediately dialed a number he had hoped never to use again. The voice that answered spoke with a Russian accent thick as winter vodka. "Dmitri," Thorne said, forcing his voice to remain steady, "we have a problem. The ghost has returned from the dead." "How did you?" "In our business, Colonel, we monitor all frequencies. Your pilot is alive, and she is talking to people who ask uncomfortable questions. This is unfortunate for our mutual arrangement." Through his office window, Thorne could see the Potomac River flowing past the Pentagon's walls, carrying debris toward the Chesapeake Bay and the open ocean beyond. Everything seemed suddenly fragile, temporary, as if the entire carefully ordered world of military bureaucracy could be swept away by a single inconvenient truth. "What are our options?" he asked. "For you, very few. For us, we have contingencies." The line went dead, leaving Thorne staring at his phone and contemplating the possibility that his greatest mistake had not been betraying Vera Nakamura. His greatest mistake had been trusting foreign intelligence services to keep their word about eliminating loose ends. Outside his window, a pair of F-16s screamed overhead in formation, their afterburners painting contrails across the autumn sky like the signature of angels, or like the signature of judgment. The Blackhawk's cabin thrummed with the steady vibration of rotor wash as Vera studied the faces of her captors, or rescuers, depending on perspective. Director Vasquez sat across from her with the relaxed posture of someone completely comfortable with violence, while the two other operators maintained professional silence behind wraparound sunglasses that reflected Vera's own face back at her in distorted fragments. 16 years of service, Vasquez said, consulting her tablet as the helicopter banked northeast over the German countryside. "Top 5% of your academy class. 43 combat missions with 0 losses. Instructor pilot rating on 4 different airframes. Then suddenly, inexplicably, you crash a $200 million stealth fighter into the Syrian desert." "Officially," Vera replied, watching farmland scroll pass through the porthole, "that's what happened. Unofficially, you discovered that your commanding officer was selling targeting data to foreign intelligence services. Specifically, Russian GRU operatives who were using American reconnaissance flights to identify and eliminate Syrian resistance leaders we were secretly supporting." The words hit Vera like flak bursts, each revelation exploding in her memory with painful clarity. She had been tasked with photographing a supposed chemical weapons facility when her aircraft's targeting systems had begun highlighting coordinates that made no tactical sense. Instead of military installations, her cameras had been locked onto what appeared to be civilian refugee camps and opposition meeting sites. "I tried to abort the mission," she said quietly. Command ordered me to continue. Command, Vasquez corrected, was Colonel Marcus Thorne, who had been receiving deposits of cryptocurrency into offshore accounts for 18 months, who had personally selected you for the mission because your flight patterns were predictable and your aircraft could be remotely accessed through backdoor maintenance protocols. The helicopter's engines changed pitch as they entered controlled airspace, the pilots communicating with ground control in the clipped, professional tones that had once been Vera's native language. She closed her eyes and let the familiar sounds wash over her, remembering what it felt like to be part of something larger than herself, something that mattered. They tried to hijack my aircraft systems during the mission, she said. I fought back, took manual control and broke radio protocol to document what I was seeing. Then everything went dark. Not everything, Vasquez said, leaning forward with predatory interest. Your aircraft's black box survived. So did your final transmission, the one where you identified 17 target coordinates that didn't match your official mission parameters. Vera opened her eyes and met Vasquez's gaze directly. I crashed the aircraft deliberately. Better to lose a Raptor than let it become a weapon against refugees. Except you didn't crash it, Vasquez said, swiping to another image on her tablet. You executed a controlled landing in a wadi 40 kilometers from your supposed crash site. The explosion that convinced search and rescue teams you had died was caused by thermite charges you improvised from emergency flares. The admission hung in the cabin air like smoke. Vera had never told anyone about those desperate final minutes, rigging her aircraft to appear destroyed, while she escaped through hostile territory on foot. 3 days of walking through desert wasteland, living on survival rations and her own stubborn refusal to let Thorne's corruption claim another victory. How did you survive the hike out? One of the operators asked, the first words either of them had spoken during the flight. I didn't, Vera replied. Ghost did. She had earned the call sign during her first deployment, when her ability to appear suddenly behind enemy aircraft had become legendary among her squadron. But after Syria, the name had taken on different meaning. She had become a ghost in the most literal sense, a person who officially didn't exist, who had been erased from records and memories alike. We've been tracking you for 6 months, Vasquez admitted, waiting for the right moment to make contact. Your former commander has been busy since your disappearance. 3 more pilots have died in suspicious aircraft accidents. All of them had stumbled across irregularities in mission planning. The Blackhawk banked sharply eastward, and through the porthole Vera could see the distinctive silhouette of Prague's skyline rising from the horizon. Wherever they were taking her, it wasn't home. But then again, she hadn't had a home for 3 years. The radio crackled with encrypted communications, tactical frequencies that spoke of operations planned in shadows and executed by people who didn't officially exist. Vera found herself leaning forward, drawn by the familiar cadence of military coordination despite everything that had happened. Whatever came next, at least she would be flying again. The safe house squatted in Prague's industrial district like a concrete tumor, unremarkable among the warehouses and abandoned factories that lined the Vltava River. Inside, banks of monitors displayed satellite feeds, communication intercepts, and tactical overlays that painted a picture of global crisis management occurring far from any official chain of command. Welcome to Task Force Lazarus, Vasquez said as they passed through multiple security checkpoints, each one revealing another layer of an operation that clearly existed outside normal military protocols. Resurrection specialists. The main briefing room contained a dozen personnel from various nations, American, British, German, Polish, all wearing identical black tactical uniforms without rank or unit insignia. They looked up as Vera entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to something that might have been recognition. Ladies and gentlemen, Vasquez announced, Meet the pilot officially killed in action 3 years ago. The pilot who chose to crash a $200 million aircraft rather than participate in war crimes. A tall Nordic woman with pilot's hands and weathered eyes stepped forward. Squadron leader Astrid Eriksson, Royal Norwegian Air Force, officially deceased 8 months ago after ejecting over the North Sea. She extended her hand with a grip that spoke of years wrestling military aircraft through impossible weather. Welcome to the land of the living dead. Around the room, similar introductions followed. Major Kim So-young, Republic of Korea Air Force, supposedly killed in a training accident after refusing to participate in questionable surveillance operations. Captain Sophie Dubois, French Air Force, listed as missing in action after discovering arms trafficking through NATO supply chains. Flight Lieutenant Rebecca Clark, Royal Air Force, declared dead after her Typhoon allegedly suffered catastrophic mechanical failure during a routine patrol. "We're all here for the same reason," Erickson explained as they gathered around a central display table. "We asked inconvenient questions. We refused illegal orders. We threatened to expose corruption within our respective commands." The display table illuminated with a global map showing aircraft movements, financial transactions, and communication patterns that suggested a conspiracy spanning multiple continents and military hierarchies. At the center of it all, connecting threads of corruption from America to Europe to the Middle East, was a single name: Marcus Thorne. "Your former commander has been busy," Vasquez said, manipulating the display to highlight specific incidents. 12 pilots dead or disappeared, 7 aircraft missing from official inventories, approximately $4 billion in diverted military aid finding its way into private accounts. Vera studied the patterns, her mind automatically calculating flight paths and operational parameters from the scattered data points. He's not working alone. This level of coordination requires support from multiple intelligence agencies. Russian GRU, specifically, Dubois confirmed, her French accent lending gravity to the words. They've been cultivating assets within NATO air commands for years. Thorne was just their most successful recruitment. The implications cascaded through Vera's consciousness like dominoes falling in precise sequence. If foreign intelligence services had penetrated Allied air commands deeply enough to eliminate inconvenient witnesses, then every military operation of the past 5 years was potentially compromised. Every pilot who had died in suspicious accidents might have been murdered for asking the wrong questions. "What's the mission?" she asked, because in her experience, groups like this didn't extract retired pilots for social reunions. Vasquez smiled, and this time there was something almost predatory in the expression. "Thorne has been promoted to strategic planning. He now has oversight authority for NATO air operations across Eastern Europe. Tomorrow, he's scheduled to brief alliance commanders on proposed flight patterns for monitoring Russian military buildup near the Ukrainian border." "Flight patterns," Vera repeated, understanding immediately, "which would expose NATO reconnaissance capabilities to anyone listening." "Or," Clark added grimly, "provide targeting data for surface-to-air missile systems that mysteriously appear wherever our aircraft happen to be flying." The weight of betrayal settled over the room like radiation, invisible, odorless, but somehow poisoning everything it touched. These were warriors who had devoted their lives to protecting democratic ideals, only to discover that their own commands had been corrupted from within by the very enemies they had sworn to fight. "So what do you want from me?" Vera asked. "Tomorrow's briefing," Vasquez said, "is taking place at Ramstein Air Base, the same base that discharged you without explanation 3 years ago. We need someone to get inside, document Thorne's presentation, and obtain evidence of his communications with foreign assets." "And you think I can just walk back onto a military installation that declared me persona non grata?" "No," Vasquez replied, her smile widening. "We think Ghost can." Through the safe house windows, Prague's ancient spires caught the dying light of afternoon sun, their Gothic shadows stretching toward a horizon that promised either redemption or damnation. Vera had spent 3 years trying to build a life outside the military, convincing herself that civilian existence could provide meaning and purpose. But purpose, she was beginning to understand, had never stopped looking for her. The mission planning room buzzed with the controlled urgency of professional soldiers preparing for an operation where failure meant more than career termination. Vera found herself studying tactical displays and aircraft specifications for the first time in 3 years, her mind automatically calculating approach vectors and defensive capabilities, as if no time had passed at all. Ramstein's perimeter security has been upgraded since your departure, explained Technical Sergeant Maria Santos, a communications specialist whose expertise in electronic warfare was immediately apparent from her modifications to standard radio equipment. Motion sensors every 30 meters, thermal imaging on all approach routes, and biometric scanners at every entry point. "They're specifically watching for me?" Vera asked. "They're watching for everyone," Santos replied. "Thorne has been paranoid since Prague Station reported unusual activity in former Soviet satellite states. He knows someone is investigating him." Squadron leader Eriksson spread paper charts across the table, old-school navigation aids that couldn't be electronically compromised or remotely accessed. "Tomorrow's NATO briefing begins at 800 hours. Thorne will be presenting in Building 2017, Conference Room Alpha. Maximum security classification, minimal personnel." "How minimal?" Vera studied the base layout, noting security checkpoints and guard rotations that had changed significantly since her time at Ramstein. 12 Alliance representatives, 4 security personnel, and Thorne himself, Captain Dubois answered. "The presentation is expected to last 45 minutes, followed by classified discussion of operational deployment schedules." "Recording devices. Official transcription equipment will be present," Vasquez said, "but we need independent documentation, audio, video, and most importantly, access to Thorne's personal communication devices during the briefing." Vera traced potential infiltration routes across the base diagram, her tactical mind automatically identifying choke points and escape corridors. "This is insane. Even if I could get inside, there's no way to approach the briefing room without proper credentials." "Actually," Santos said with a grin that suggested she had been looking forward to this revelation, "there is." She activated a laptop computer that immediately displayed personnel records for the Ramstein Air Base maintenance crew. Among the photographs and security clearances was a face that made Vera's heart skip several beats. "Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh," Santos announced, "aircraft maintenance specialist, assigned to Building 2017's audio-visual support systems. She's also your former roommate from Officer Candidate School." The photograph showed a woman with grease-stained hands and laugh lines around her eyes, someone who had chosen to build and maintain aircraft rather than fly them, but who understood military aviation with the same passion that had once driven Vera through pilot training. They had shared a barracks room for 6 months, studying together through endless nights of aerodynamics and military law. "Jenny," Vera whispered, remembering late-night conversations about duty and honor, and the belief that serving in uniform meant protecting something worth preserving. "She's been asking questions about your disappearance for 3 years," Eriksson said quietly. "Unofficial inquiries that have made certain people nervous. Her security clearance has been downgraded twice, and she's currently under administrative review for irregular conduct." "They're setting her up for dismissal," Vera realized. "Or worse," Vasquez confirmed. 3 other maintenance personnel who worked on your aircraft have died in accidents over the past year. Vehicle crashes, industrial incidents, heart attacks in otherwise healthy individuals." The pattern was becoming clear with the horrible inevitability of an aircraft entering an unrecoverable spin. Thorne wasn't just covering up his original crime. He was systematically eliminating anyone who might possess evidence about Operation Shadowfall. The fact that Jenny was still alive meant she either knew something critically important or was being kept alive as bait. "She's the trap," Vera said. "Almost certainly," Vasquez agreed. "But she's also our only reliable contact inside Ramstein's security perimeter. If we're going to expose Thorne's operation and prevent further NATO intelligence from being compromised, we need someone on the inside." Vera stared at Jenny's photograph, remembering a younger woman who had believed that serving her country meant something noble and pure. The idea of putting her former roommate at additional risk felt like swallowing broken glass, but the alternative, allowing Thorne to continue selling NATO secrets to enemy intelligence services, would eventually cost thousands of lives. "What's the extraction plan?" she asked. "That," Vasquez said, "depends on what we discover tomorrow. If Thorne is just a middle management traitor, we document his crimes and turn evidence over to appropriate authorities. If he's part of a larger conspiracy involving senior NATO leadership." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air like cordite smoke. Sometimes justice required operating outside official channels. Sometimes patriots had to become criminals in order to preserve the institutions they had sworn to defend. "Either way," Clark added grimly, "tomorrow is likely to be very interesting for everyone involved." The evening Prague sky had deepened to the color of old bruises by the time Vera found herself alone on the safe house rooftop, studying satellite imagery of Ramstein Air Base on a ruggedized tablet computer. 3 years of civilian life hadn't dulled her ability to read tactical situations, and what she saw in the base's current security posture suggested that Colonel Thorne was expecting trouble. "Can't sleep either." Director Vasquez emerged from the stairwell, carrying 2 cups of coffee that smelled like diesel fuel and determination. "Used to do my best thinking at altitude," Vera replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Civilian life is too horizontal." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Prague's lights twinkle below them like a galaxy viewed from space. The city had survived Nazi occupation, Soviet domination, and the chaos of democratic revolution. It endured because its people understood that freedom required constant vigilance against those who would sacrifice principles for personal advantage. "Can I ask you something?" Vasquez said eventually. "What made you crash the Raptor? You could have completed the mission, filed a report through proper channels, let the system handle Thorne's corruption." Vera considered the question, remembering the moment when her aircraft's targeting systems had locked onto coordinates that she knew contained refugee families fleeing Syrian government forces. The moment when following orders would have made her complicit in war crimes. "I saw children through my targeting pod," she said finally. "Families carrying backpacks and pushing baby strollers through a checkpoint that was supposed to be a chemical weapons facility. My orders were to photograph the location for future targeting reference." "So you chose to disobey?" "I chose to remember why we wear the uniform." Vera took a long sip of coffee, tasting memories of squadron-ready rooms and pre-flight briefings where honor had seemed like an absolute principle rather than a negotiable commodity. The mission wasn't to gather intelligence. It was to provide targeting data for massacre. Vasquez nodded slowly, as if this explanation confirmed something she had already suspected. "Do you know how many pilots would have made the same choice?" "I try not to think about that. We've recruited 17 former military aviators over the past 2 years," Vasquez continued. "All of them discovered corruption within their chains of command. All of them chose conscience over career. You're not alone in this, Vera." The use of her first name carried unexpected weight. the first time in 3 years that someone in authority had spoken to her as an equal rather than a failed veteran or civilian employee. It reminded her of squadron camaraderie, the way military units became families bonded by shared risk and mutual trust. "What happens after tomorrow?" Vera asked. "Assuming we survive whatever Thorn has planned." "That depends on what we find. If this conspiracy involves only a few corrupt officers, we document everything and turn it over to appropriate authorities. If it goes deeper—" Vasquez paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes institutions become so compromised that they can only be saved by people willing to operate outside those institutions. Patriots pretending to be traitors. Or traitors pretending to be patriots. History will decide which." A communication device on Vasquez's belt chirped with an incoming encrypted message. She checked the display and frowned, her expression shifting from thoughtful to tactical alertness. "What is it?" Vera asked. "Intercepted communication from Ramstein. Colonel Thorn just requested an emergency security briefing with base command. Subject: potential terrorist infiltration threat during tomorrow's NATO conference." The coffee suddenly tasted like ashes in Vera's mouth. He knows we're coming. Either that, or he's creating justification for additional security measures that would make infiltration impossible. Vasquez stared at the message display, her tactical mind obviously working through contingencies and alternative approaches. "We may need to accelerate our timeline. Or change the mission entirely," Vera suggested. "If Thorn is expecting an infiltration attempt, maybe we give him something else to worry about." "Such as?" Vera smiled, and for the first time in 3 years it felt like the expression her squadron mates would have recognized. "Ghost stories." Below them, Prague's ancient streets whispered with the footsteps of history, carrying secrets from centuries of conflict between those who served power and those who served truth. Tomorrow would add another chapter to that endless story. The question was whether it would be written in victory or blood. Dawn broke over Prague like spilled mercury, gray light filtering through industrial smog and low-hanging clouds that promised rain before noon. In the safe house basement, Task Force Lazarus had transformed a storage room into a tactical operations center complete with secure communication links, real-time satellite feeds, and equipment that officially didn't exist in any military inventory. "Ramstein base security has been elevated to Force Protection Condition Charlie," reported Santos, monitoring communication intercepts from her array of modified radio equipment. "All personnel movements restricted to essential duties only. Colonel Thorn's briefing has been moved to an underground conference facility with enhanced electronic countermeasures." Vera studied the updated base layout on her tablet, noting that their original infiltration plan had just become exponentially more difficult. The underground facility was designed to prevent both electronic surveillance and unauthorized access, a bunker that could withstand everything from electromagnetic pulses to direct military assault. "Time to get creative," she murmured, her mind shifting into the tactical problem-solving mode that had made her one of the Air Force's most effective combat pilots. "We've identified an alternative approach," Major Kim So-young announced from her position at the Intelligence Analysis Station. Her English carried the precise articulation of someone who had learned the language from textbooks rather than conversation, but her tactical acumen was immediately apparent from the operational diagrams she had prepared. "Thorn's personal aircraft," Kim continued, highlighting a specific hangar on the satellite feed. "Modified C-37A Gulfstream, tail number 10476. It arrived at Ramstein 6 hours ago carrying classified communications equipment that requires specialized maintenance." "Maintenance performed by?" Vera asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh," Santos confirmed. She's been assigned as the primary technician for all VIP aircraft systems. Her access credentials include the underground facility where tomorrow's briefing will occur. The plan crystallized in Vera's mind with the beautiful simplicity of a perfect tactical solution. Instead of trying to breach Ramstein's enhanced security perimeter, they would use the base's own protocols against itself. Jenny's maintenance access would provide legitimate entry to the restricted areas, while Vera's knowledge of aircraft systems would allow them to install surveillance equipment during routine inspection procedures. "There's one problem," Captain Dubois observed from her position, monitoring European air traffic control frequencies. "Staff Sergeant Walsh doesn't know we exist. How do we make contact without triggering security protocols?" "We don't make contact," Vera replied. "I do." The room fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of Prague traffic beginning the morning commute. Everyone understood the implications. Vera would be exposing herself to capture or elimination, while approaching someone whose loyalty was unknown and whose security situation was already compromised. "Negative," Vasquez said firmly. "Too much risk for uncertain gain. We'll find another approach." "There is no other approach," Vera countered. "Jenny knows me. She'll listen to me. And if this goes sideways, she's the only person at Ramstein who might be willing to help us get evidence out." "It's a suicide mission," Erickson said bluntly. "Thorne knows you're alive now. He'll have the entire base watching for you." "Good," Vera replied, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. "Let him watch for me. While he's tracking Ghost, he won't notice the maintenance technician installing surveillance equipment in his personal aircraft." She moved to the equipment locker and began selecting gear, not the high-tech gadgets that might trigger security scanners, but the mundane tools that any aircraft maintenance worker might carry. Wire strippers, circuit testers, replacement components that could serve double duty as recording devices. "This is insane," Clark muttered, but she was already pulling up technical specifications for the C-37A's communication systems. "But if we're doing it, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." The next several hours blurred together in a cascade of mission planning, equipment modification, and intelligence gathering that felt like coming home after 3 years of exile. Vera found herself remembering why she had originally chosen military service, not for glory or adventure, but for the privilege of working alongside people who understood that some principles were worth dying for. By mid-afternoon, they had crafted an infiltration plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Given their circumstances, Vera reflected, those categories weren't mutually exclusive. The forged maintenance orders appeared flawless to anyone without access to classified verification systems, which meant they would pass casual inspection while failing any serious security review. Vera would have exactly 43 minutes between Jenny's scheduled arrival at Hangar 7 and the next automated security sweep. 43 minutes to renew a friendship, explain 3 years of secrets, and convince her former roommate to commit treason against a corrupt system in service of a higher loyalty. As Prague's afternoon dissolved into evening, Vera realized she was no longer afraid. Fear was a luxury that belonged to people who had something left to lose. The commercial flight from Prague to Frankfurt carried the usual mixture of business travelers and tourists, none of whom paid attention to the unremarkable woman in jeans and a hardware store windbreaker, who spent the 40-minute flight staring out the window at German countryside that looked deceptively peaceful from 30,000 feet. Vera had chosen civilian clothes and civilian transportation, specifically to avoid the electronic surveillance networks that would flag military or government travel. To anyone watching passenger manifests, she was just another American contractor returning to work at one of Germany's numerous commercial aviation facilities. The rental car was equally anonymous, a silver Volkswagen that blended perfectly with European traffic patterns as she drove the familiar route toward Ramstein-Miesenbach. Every kilometer brought fresh memories of a life she had been forced to